See, so. Well, good morning, everyone. This is September the 5th, 2021, and this is our Genie seminar. By participating, you are agreeing that this is being recorded and will be available to people in the future. So the message is simply, we invite you to share your personal ideas. The more you can relate the content to your personal life experience, the more you'll get out of it. But if there's something that is so personal, you don't want it to be public, then that would not be a good idea to share. So thank you for your permission there and for participating. The Genie Seminar, remind you, is a new method of education. The advantage of a Genie Seminar, we bring people together to share genius, to share our co-creator ideas. When we have the traditional method of education is a talking head, someone that tells you basically often very good information, but they're telling you things that people already know. One of the big advantages of the Genie Seminar is that we're using our collective awareness, our collective genius, to look at information we don't know. There's certainly far more that we don't know than we do know in the way of knowledge, and that we need to know if we're going to learn to cooperate together and resolve some of the major issues that we're having in the world today. So that's the Genie Seminar here, and we're recording this so that other people might begin to use this as a method of education. Our goal would be to create a worldwide movement to see the way the individuals, a couple of alcoholic men did with Alcoholics Anonymous, where people can go to a meeting where it's safe and comfortable, and it would be free. Those are the basic ideas. And right now, I don't personally see that existing in the world today. In the world, there are very few environments that are safe where you won't be cannibalized if you don't agree with other people. So the last meetings we had, we talked about two things, I would say, if I recall. Interrupt me if I'm wrong. The first is we were going to review the word switches, which is the first set of ideas that have to do with developing a newer way of thinking, where people learn to cooperate instead of compete with one another. And the second item was that we had specific examples, wanted to talk about how we could practically apply the 7+2 word switches. So I'm going to start first by very rapidly going through these 7 word switches to remind you again. The first one was, I think I can rather than I cannot. I give up. Why bother? What's the use? Who cares? Fork it. These are the words that basically, the inhibiting words that keep us from moving forward. So I think I can is like turning on a light switch. It's the beginning of enlightening us. It's turning on our energy. We don't have to know about the wiring in the wall. Fortunately, people ahead of us have created electricity. They've created a lot of what we need. Now, all we need to do to turn on the light is to go over and flip the light switch. We don't have to understand so much of the details, but I think I can is the first item, then one of the most important. Until we turn our energy on, as long as we have the idea it's too hard, it's too difficult, we just don't take action. And unfortunately, when it comes to the major problems we have in the world today, most people do not address them. There's no one really coming up with a practical solution, for example, to many of the issues, nuclear weapons, global warming, pollution. We really don't have very good solutions right now. We're still fighting with one another about who's right and who's wrong. The second word switch, I allow. The I allow word switch is important because it essentially says, I am going to take responsibility to make some changes, instead of the alternative, which is who's wrong and who's to blame. Instead of taking responsibility, our usual tendency, our ancestors, would be to blame and be prepared to fight, either the so-called fight or flight response. So I allow is the word switch that gets rid of shaming, blaming, and complaining. Our natural tendency that we inherit when we're frustrated is to strike out or to blame others, or with humans only, we tend to direct the anger to ourselves, and that we call guilt. You don't see guilt too much in animals, but I allow is a critical word because it gets rid of the blaming, shaming, and complaining. I could instead of I should. The should word is the word that tells us what other people want us to do. For the first years of our life, we're getting lots of shoulds and not too many coulds. The most common word is in childhood is basically you can't. You can't put your hand on the hot oven. You can't wipe your nose on the curtains. You can't go into the street. There are not too many things you're told you can do. So most of it is learning the things you can't do. And so the could word is an invitation to our genie organ, this what we have between our ears that can solve problems and grant wishes. The should is what other people tell us they want us to do. And that's the way most of our early life is based on what other people tell us. We're born with a blank slate, or what's known as a tabula rasa. Our animal brain is functioning when we're born, but our cerebral cortex, or what we call our genie organ, is a blank slate ready to be trained and educated. So the could word is the invitation to make change. The fourth word switch is, I think, perhaps the most critical one. It's where we substitute both and for either or. Our language that we've developed is basically an either or language. When our ancestors created words 50,000 years ago, they basically created a vocabulary of either or words and either or language. So they developed the religious words, which say that my God is the right God and yours is wrong. They created patriotic flags that say my tribe is the right tribe, my country. And then later we developed political words that say you have to be blue or red in this country. And so they're depending on where you go, there are thousands of political words that divide us into either or. So I think that's the most important, one of the most important, because it divides us into us and them, good or bad, right or wrong. And when we say both and, we're saying what are the things that you have to offer and what do I have to offer? So these first four word switches, I think I can, I could, I allow, and both and, they all lead to the fifth word switch, which was a sentence. So the fifth word switch was a very simple sentence that I think, if we could change this one sentence, it would change everything. Simply says, how can your tribe and my tribe work together for now and the future? The animal brain that we inherit basically has a different motto or different meme. The animal brain that we learn earlier in life and we inherit is what's good for me and my family and my tribe for here and now. The animal brain does not use language, doesn't have religion, it doesn't have science. So the animal brain that we're born with basically is an either or, leads to either or thinking. And so that one sentence, what works for my tribe and your tribe for now and the future, gets rid of all the blaming, shaming, and complaining. It incorporates all the earlier four words. And it simply says, how can we direct your energy and my energy to solve the problems, to find the universal goals that we want? No right and no wrong, simply what works that we can agree on for all of us. And then the sixth and seventh word switches were like the brakes. The first five word switches are the gasoline, what to do. The sixth and seventh word switches are what we've been doing that we need to stop doing. So instead of responding to stress with anger, anxiety, and fear, which is the usual response, the automatic response, we substitute the word energy. We're saying that the response that happens when there's stress is we're aware of the stress response where blood is directed to the brain to get more alertness. There's less blood going for digestion. We call that the emergency response. And you have adrenaline that's secreted. You're ready to deal with something on a short-term basis. So if we can substitute energy for anger, fear, and so on, we're beginning to say, what is it that we can work together and think things through rather than we have to fight or run? And then the seventh word switch, the last one, was where we substitute, remember, urgency for emergency. The emergency response says virtually everything, our ancestors for millions of years were confronted with wild animals, for other groups that wanted to take their cave, take their food, take their people, whatever. So it was appropriate to be prepared for emergencies for our ancestors. But in today's world, if you have a stress reaction and you deal with it as emergency and you keep dealing with everything as an emergency, you overreact, you're straining your whole biologic system, and that's where we get into these psychosomatic responses and cause a lot of the stress-related problems. So the seventh word switch is, instead of emergency, we use the word urgency. It's not an emergency. And then we add the words high, medium, or low urgency. And in a relatively civilized world, most everything we deal with is low urgency. Most things we can discuss, we can come to some negotiation to solve a problem, instead of saying that there's going to be a right or wrong. So we get rid of the right or wrong. We create a safe environment where we're working together. So those are the 7 word switches. And if we practice those 7 word switches instead of the alternative ones that we learn, it would dramatically change the whole world. And what I've been saying to people and some of the things that I've been doing, if we just simply substitute both and for either or and adopt in one sentence, what's good for my tribe and your tribe for now and the future, it's that simple. It would basically change the whole way that we relate to one another in this world. It would become a safer environment. And so that's the practical part of it. Now we talked about, let's get to the practical part of the situation. I've been giving a little thought to this. We gave the example of teenagers who are stealing cars. And if they're interrupted, they may take out a gun, they may shoot at people. And then the person who's now seeing their car being stolen is saying that maybe I should get a gun, I'll shoot back. So before you know it, we're getting escalation here. So here we have a situation. Let's apply these 7 word switches to that situation. If we keep the either or way of thinking, we have basically 2 ways of dealing with this. Apparently the conservative idea is, let's lock these kids up and throw the key away. Let's punish them because they're bad kids. And we certainly can't let them go ahead and continue to do this. The more liberal way of looking at it is, well, you have to understand these kids have been deprived, they've had bad childhoods, and there's reasons why they do this. And it's really kind of something that we ought to forgive them. We'll maybe slap their hands a little bit, but we'll let them go back out. And then what happens is they continue to repeat the same situation. And instead of just stealing something now, they're carrying guns and they're working in gangs and so on. We've just had recently in the Hartford newspaper a number of incidents recently. One of them where somebody pulled a Porsche car into a very popular place, and a gang of kids came and pulled her out of the car. At first, they demanded her phone. They pulled her out of the car, and then they hijacked the car and ran off. And we've had a couple instances like that. We had another one where a woman pulled up next to someone, pulled a young girl out of the car and beat her up, actually, while people were driving by, and nobody did anything. Just there she was, beating this gal to a pulp, and then she drove off, and nobody stopped even. Now that the police are saying, can anybody identify that? But nobody did anything. They just let it go because it's too difficult, or nobody wanted to be involved. So here's the difference, you see. Instead of an either or way of thinking, which says you have to be on the side of strict punishment, or figuring out these kids deserve a break each time because they've had bad upbringings, we substitute both and for either or. first we say, I think I can. I think I can do something about it. I'm going to deal with the situation. I'm going to ask my question, what could I do instead of what should be done? I'm going to say, what can I do? Is there a way that we can use a both and way of responding rather than an either or way? And then when we look at both and instead of either or, it's not who's right and who's wrong anymore. It's simply that we probably come to the idea that each person has something worthwhile offering. Yes, we need to set some limits with these kids. We have to figure out a way, probably, to limit their activity and probably re-educate them. We have to realize that if they're stealing cars to get the converters or whatever parts of the car they're looking to get money, it may be because they haven't had an opportunity to get enough food. Or they might have an opportunity to get a proper education and upbringing. So then we begin to see there are many factors that go along here. It's not an either or do this or that. It's a matter we have to do this and that, and then probably a number of other things. I've suggested one of the big things is as long as there's a big monetary discrepancy. Some people have more than enough and they're wasting a lot of what they have, and there are other people that are hungry or starving. It's pretty obvious that they're going to be fighting and confrontation and so on. So I think that would be I think a practical example how we can apply these 7 word switches. And I would say we can do that to any of the situations that we've addressed. That if we think in terms of both and instead of either or, we begin to look at there are many issues, and they may be complex. It's not easy. If you learn to play a musical instrument, it's not just you do one thing or the other. You've got a whole series of steps. When we created when we went to walk on the moon, or when we created a virus, when we created the nuclear weapon, it wasn't 1 or 2 things we did. It took years. And who was the author who said that anything that's worthwhile doing, it takes 10,000 hours of study and work for anything that's virtually meaningful? So we want to try to, our animal brain wants to simplify this and say, what's easy, what's good for me for easy now and now. So that's my introduction. And I just want to conclude now with getting an example here. If you don't, Pacey, mind if I use you as an example? I'll put you in a hot spot here. You're muted. Speak up, unmute yourself.
I'll tell you after you give the example.
Okay, here's the example. The example is, do we get caught up? The question, the big sentence that we've said is the critical sentence is, what's good for me and my family and my tribe for here and now is the common motto or meme. And the preferred meme would be, what's good for my tribe and your tribe, for me and you, for it's both and me and your tribe for now and the future. So the example I gave is a couple of weeks ago, Pacey, you had indicated you were going to do something to prepare us for the next meeting. You brought up a topic. Everybody thought it was a great topic. And you were going to pick it up the next meeting. The next meeting, when you came back, you said, oh, I forgot to do it. Or I didn't do it. And then you said, I will do it the next meeting. And that was fine. So that would have been the 3rd time. And then the 3rd week came up and you didn't show up. So twice you made promises that you're going to do something. And instead, what did you do? You spent time with your grandchildren. Now, is that a bad thing? No, it's a wonderful thing, of course. But listen to the 2 sentences again. What became more important? What's good for me and my family and my tribe for here and now, or what's good for the greater whole for now and the future? So all I'm suggesting is that what that example is basically what we're seeing in the world. That we realize this is the normal, natural way that most people act. They have the sentence, what's good for me and my family and my tribe for here and now, until we begin to get an idea of something a little different. So I'm going to conclude this with the story that I may have said before, but my life is really great right now. I'm 85. I'm getting along pretty good. We have plenty of money. Most of our family is doing well, and so on. I have a wonderful place to live. I'm happy. I love myself. I love myself to the abundant that overflows to rich others. So basically, I'm happy. But I have one concern, that keeps me awake at night. And to me, it's a driving issue, a very passionate thing. And I've shared this. I have this thought that there's a bus stuck on the train track, and the people that I love are on that bus. That includes my family, my kids, my grandkids, my great grandkids, friends. They're on that bus. And if you have family and friends, your kids are on that bus. And there's a train coming down the way, and we hear clickety clack, and it's getting closer and closer to demolish that bus. And you get the idea. It's really it's a state of that we have right now. When you think that's happening, you say, is there something we can do to prevent that? And the issue is, yes, if there's one way to switch the tracks, to move tracks just so the train will go north or south instead of going straight to hit that bus, it's a simple matter of one mechanical switch could prevent all that and change everything. And here we have 7 word switches that will switch that train away if we take the time to work on it. But most people are very resistant to even address the issue. We have this number of problems. As you said, the big 3 are probably global warming, pollution, and wars. And then now we have nuclear weapons. So the issue is what I'm suggesting to you is it's normal, natural behavior that people will say what's good for me and my family and my tribe for here and now, because that's the way we're biologically and historically constructed. And I think Einstein's message is unless we can teach ourselves a newer way of thinking, where we begin to think in terms of what's good for my tribe and your tribe, and that means we need a new language like the 7 word switches. We need to understand something about what we call the mental freedom control panel. We need something to understand about the evolution of love. That the reason we have these problems is called tribal love. We identify with our tribe instead of universal love. And so there's a whole series of steps, but we're really kind of stuck on that first step, the word switches. We've got to get beyond that. And so that's why I bring that up. So this is not a matter of what's right or wrong. I'm just trying to make an observation that I think we are pretty much stuck in the idea that in our meetings, we still get caught in who's right and who's wrong. And we get away from the idea, what are the universal goals that we all want? And we've said they are happiness, enough, love, and peace. They're not the only ones. The H can, in addition to standing for happiness, it can stand for health as well. And the E, in addition to standing for enough food and water and spiritual ideas, it can also stand for enough education. But these are can we identify what we all want and how we can get there? So that's my introduction, and I'm going to I've left you with a couple of stinging things I hope to address and share your genius now and see what you think about that.
Well, I don't think I have a lot to sting, but I think it is a good example of, I think, a circumstance that we keep running into and might be useful to acknowledge, because to me, I think this is a regular stumbling block that we come up to. If, people, even as homogenous as we are in this group, and this is a fairly homogenous group from a diversity point of view, even as homogenous as we are in this group, people, are on different parts of their own journey, different parts of their own trajectory. And, we come together on these meetings, once a week, which is, I think, a great success. It comes with some great effort and intention and shared vision. And I think that in itself demonstrates a kind of unity. But I also think that people are at different places in their own lives of what is important, what is in front of their windshield that they need to deal with. And I think that one of the struggles we have is recognizing that, and how do we engage a group of people, even as homogenous as we are, who, even with the same intention, at different time have different priorities. I think by choosing to spend time with my grandchildren, who I've seen little through the pandemic, and the time I have with them in person, to me is pretty precious. I don't really see that as detracting from my interest in world peace or my interest in this group. But I think in the real world, we all, have different seasons or different chapters, and I think I can be committed to this and engage with my grandchildren. And the reality is we can't be at two places in the same time. And I think the bigger picture is that I can be involved in both. I think maybe it is a both and solution, and to recognize that although, and I did with sincerity apologize for not showing up and not doing my homework, but at the same time, that was a choice that I made. The first time I didn't follow through was really because I was devoted to my work. I've been working very hard in the office. This COVID pandemic and the office, medicine issues have been really overwhelming. Without exaggeration, I work probably 12 hours a day, 12 or 13 hours a day on the days that I work. And I go in at 9:30. I go in at 7:30 in the morning. I come home at 8 or 8:30 at night. I don't really see that as not as a problem really, but I see that is the nature of who we are and how we behave in this earth. We have different priorities at different times, and it does make the process slow. But it doesn't. I think it used to make me uncomfortable to feel like, I promised I would do it and I didn't get to it. But I really don't feel that way. I feel like the fact that I come most Sundays, I take it to, my weekends are precious time, and I take an hour and a half or two every Sunday out of that to come to work on this, and I think about it during the week. So I don't really feel particularly bad about not following through with certain things, and I used to feel bad about disappointing you as my father, and I enjoy coming, but I don't feel particularly bad about disappointing you because I couldn't come to the meeting. I do think, and I'll stop after this, I think for your own personal evolution and for finding a way to have this meeting move forward, I think we have to do it in a way that recognizes people will have periods where they're more interested and more engaged, and where people have other things in their windshield that they do choose to attend to because it is more important in that moment. And I think we have to accommodate that in our own exploration, and also developing a program that will have people like me be involved, and also people like me get distracted to other things that are priorities in their life. And I think that's I don't know that we have a program that accommodates that very well. So that's all.
Just my comment is that I think in Dad's eyes, maybe I will be number one now and Pacey will be number 5. Bad son, bad son. Well, I think it's still worth going back to talking about how to apply the 7+2 to a particular case. Because I feel a little bit like, Dad, you sort of talked about how, the 7+2 might apply. And you almost implied that, well, that's done, that you've kind of summed it up in how we can apply the 7+2 and see how progress can be made. And I'm not sure if that was your intent. But I still think there's a lot of fertile ground to look at that and see if we can come up with agreement, because I really didn't agree with, some of the suppositions that it's as easy as just saying it's now, it's both and I think that's I think it's helpful to actually pull apart and stick with a particular example and see how this works. And my kind of thinking is it might not turn out, that it's quite that straightforward. And I kind of suspect we're going to see that the disagreement is not along picking the right vocabulary. The disagreement is fundamental differences on, human nature and how do you approach conflict or disagreement. So I'm sort of in favor of keeping focus on something and just really seeing how this thing, how the 7+2, is supposed to help us resolve this, and or seeing that do we really come up with not different understandings of vocabulary, but really just different world views on how do you approach a problem, because I think that's kind of where, obviously it's not going to be all non-verb, it's not all just getting the right vocabulary or all just complete disagreement on basic principles. There's probably somewhere between, but I think by actually talking about it, we get to see where we are on the spectrum and maybe surface the idea that it might be a little more complicated than, do we have the right, are we just not understanding the vocabulary? So I'm willing, I know nobody's talking at this point, but I'm willing to kind of go back and, maybe ask some of those questions. Or we can go back and beat on Pacey. That'd be okay with me too.
Well, I have the notes that I saved. I think we got through the first 2 or 3 word switches. I have the notes that I saved that I can put in the chat if we want to pick up that exercise of using the words to apply them to this situation, this that we've been talking about with the youth stealing cars. I personally thought that was useful. I think Josephine was very involved in that, and she's not here, so obviously she doesn't care about world peace.
Do we know where Josephine is? Is she have some conflict today?
Josephine is traveling now.
Okay.
Yeah, she can only be on for the first few minutes, but she's on her job. She's traveling.
I think she's shuttling money to North Korea to try to build the government there.
I'd like to comment on Pacey's response in terms of not just responding to what other people's expectations of you are. Not everybody knows him as well as I do, but Pacey was always been a pleaser. He wants to make other people feel good by doing what they want. And I think that's a lot of growth to say he'll take it into consideration and make a decision, but not just a decision not just to make other people happy, to make himself happy. I think that's a lot of growth and very positive. Just a comment. I'm not sure how it fits into the 7+1 or 2. Maybe you have to subtract 1. Of course, he should remember that his mother is very important to please. I don't want to have too much growth.
Yes, I remember. It was just not pleasing Dad, Mom. I'm still devoted to pleasing you.
Well, I'd like to pick up the feather and chime in. I think that, this programming, it's kind of all leads to the same place. Down this programming has led us to be these sovereign, self-governing beings, and discovering what the ultimate unifying principles are. It's that you always talk about our common goals. And I think that it just kind of research, or I don't know what the word is, but discovering the ultimate unifying practices that are out there. I don't know. We're such sovereign beings that what is the stimulus, the impetus that is going to make us want to unify? I guess I just have a question throughout.
Yeah, I think you're getting to the point from my point of view, Katie, and I think basically you all are missing the point that I'm trying to make. You should so getting back to the right, wrong, good or bad. This is not a question of good or bad or right or wrong. It's just a matter of observing what is. Let's be descriptive, not prescriptive. So the point I'm trying to make is that biologically we are addicted to being prescriptive. You know, when Katie uses the word sovereign, the problem is each country is sovereign. They say my country is the right country. And because we have this idea that each country has the idea that my rules and my religion is the right religion, or my political party is the right political party, they're sovereign. They're saying there's a right and there's a wrong. And what I think we need to get to in Einstein's message is we have to ask what is the way of thinking that helps us to work together, not to get caught up in right and wrong. So when I describe this situation with Pacey, the same thing with Abby. Abby, you've also indicated in the past, given a situation with, is it a question between my family or the rest of the world? The issue becomes my family will come first. Well, that's understandable. But the question is, you see that I get to is, do you really believe, or maybe you don't believe, that there is a likelihood that when you have most of the experts in the world saying that if we continue to do what we've been doing, it's only a matter of time before the people we love are going to be no longer here. And when you have 250 of the world's experts saying it's less than 10 years we have to get our act together as far as nuclear weapons, or you have a group of people saying that it's maybe 20 or 30 years is at maximum before we'll have a population that's too great and we can support, or that the global warming is such if we don't do something about the problem with global warming, it's only a matter of time. It may be 30 years, it may be 50 years. It probably won't involve me because I'm 85. I don't expect I'm going to live that much longer. And it may not involve you if you're 60, for example, but it's certainly probably going to have an effect on our children. And we're seeing that happen right now, where it's been very difficult for young people to find jobs and so on. And we're seeing kids getting involved with carrying guns and so on. So if we begin to look at the total picture, that's the message I'm trying to get. If you really believe in the total picture instead of just what's good for me and my family, you know, the fact is that Pacey, you were with your kids or your grandkids for a couple of days. And this meeting is 90 minutes. So you had plenty of time to be with your kids, and you didn't. And the same thing with you, Abby. You know, when you say you have plenty of time to take care of your kids, but are you prepared to spend much time with other people? The example I give is when you have a beggar on the street. You know, we feel good when we say, I'm going to give you $1, or I'll buy you a Coke, or I'll buy you a hamburger, or so on. But we're really not solving the problem. You see, there's a reason why this person is on the street and he doesn't have a place to live. And part of it comes back to the people who are greedy and who are cornering most of the money, and people are going, and I'm one of them, by the way. You know, I buy houses that are in foreclosure, and people get forced out of their house. I try to rent it back to them, of course, but that's the state of the world. And the question is not who's right or wrong, or who's good or bad. The question is, do we spend most of our time and energy in that sentence, what's good for me and my family for here and now, which is biological, it's normal. But when you have a world that now is changed so that we're not separate tribes, we're not sovereign anymore. All of a sudden the world is interconnected. And what happens in one part of the world, in fact, it reflects to another part. if you don't have the parts for your automobile because one country isn't making the brains that you need to run the car, then the part country that's making most of the cars can't proceed either. And the question is, until we learn to look at the total system, and that's what I'm saying is, we're all subject to this. That's the normal state of things. And the question is, can we look at what is, and based on what is, instead of saying who's right or wrong and who's good or bad, let's instead say, there's a problem here. What can we do to solve the problem? So basically what we need to do is solve the problem. And this is what Einstein suggested. We need to find a way to be able to communicate with one another like we're doing here. This is a place, and it's just a beginning. It's a tiny little beginning because we're one of the very few places where people can come, where there's a safe environment, where people have the opportunity, we've had the privilege to speak together and come up with brilliant ideas. If you're brought up in a place where you have to spend most of your day getting water just for your group, or you're taught that if you're a female that you can't get an education and you have to cover yourself up and you're not allowed to go out on the street because you have to be accompanied by a man or whatever. I mean, if you're in these people are not likely going to change things. They don't have the opportunity. What I'm simply saying is we are the low hanging fruit. We're the people who can make a change. But if we stay stuck in our normal way of thinking, unless we can rise above that and not get caught up in who's right or who's wrong, but then begin to stick more to the question, what is it that we can all agree on? Can the people that think that if you should never have an abortion, if you get pregnant, you're obligated to keep that child. Is it possible that they could work with people who think that the women have a right to decide something about their own bodies? Is it possible to find some solution, or do you have to end up by having strict laws and having a fight between who controls the Supreme Court? And if you're a doctor who does abortions, that you deserve to be shot because somebody says you're a murderer because you're legally doing an abortion. You're so on. So the question is, can we look at the bigger issue? And I think that's the point I'm trying to make. We are just as limited in some of our thinking until we begin to change the way of thinking and say, how can we cooperate and work together on some of these things?
Let me ask you a question, Dad.
Let's last comment. What is the next step then? If you don't agree with this, can you come up with a better idea instead of you can be against something, you can spend your time being against something, but can you come up with something that might work instead of being stuck as the usual way of saying, I don't like that, it's too hard, it's too difficult. What's the next better way then? Come up with something better. Go ahead, Pacey.
I guess I wonder, I'm getting lost because you bring up a lot of big global issues that we haven't really wrapped our hands around, and they're when you list them one after another, it's a little overwhelming. But let me go back to when you brought up my situation as an example. What is it in terms of, is that related to a newer way of thinking, or what is it that you were trying to illustrate or to bring out by bringing that up? What were you trying to get me or the group to understand? Because obviously that was important to you, but I don't know what you were trying to illustrate that you're now trying to expand on. What was your intent there?
Well, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for that. Yeah, what I've been saying right along, but sometimes you don't get it. It has to be repeated a number of times. And the message is that instead of getting stuck in what's good for me and my family and for my tribe for here and now, that if you can say what's good for my tribe and your tribe for now and the future, it's a both and situation. Yes, you spend time with your family. It's important, it's normal and natural. can you find what's the direct balance of time to look at the global issue in addition to the local issue? So I know it's easier and more fun to look at the local issue. And it may be more painful because it's more abstract and difficult. But until we're willing to do a both and, we get so caught up in what's good for me and my family that we don't address, there are larger issues to address. And we're stuck in thinking of the here and now. That's our biology, the way we're constructed. Our animal brain can basically address with here and now. What makes us unique is that we have our uniqueness is imagination. We have the ability to anticipate the future, not just the present. We have the anticipate the past, present, and future. We make motion pictures in our imagination. And
So what, in your opinion, would have demonstrated a more adaptive behavior on my part? You mentioned this particular event, and how would it have played differently that you think would have illustrated what you're talking about, as opposed to illustrated the opposite of what you're talking about?
The adaptive behavior would be that to consider both and rather than either or. You're more directed to an either or, what's good for me and my family. So you spend 2 days with your family and no time with the other issue. So to say, I'll take 90 minutes with this issue and I still have almost 2 days with the other issue, at least it becomes a little bit more balanced. So it's either or.
So let's explore that for a minute, because I think it's a tangible example to maybe dissect. From my perspective, we went to visit the details. We went to visit my oldest son in St. Louis, who has him and his wife and 2 grandchildren who we haven't seen for probably a few months because of COVID. We were there. We were traveling for about a day and a half on each end total, and we were there for about 48 hours. And which means we're there awake for about 24 hours. And for that 24 hours, I'm awake, the kids are there, and I'm engaged with them. And that's the last 24 hours I've had with them in the last several months because of isolation. So although I certainly did consider whether I was willing to take that time to be with them and prioritize that as my time for the last several months, and whether I should or shouldn't go on the call, I decided not to go on the call. I decided to prioritize that 24 hours of awake time to be with them. I don't think that, I think there is an either or, in that I can't be in 2 places at the same time. I can't be on the call and playing with Liddy or out in the backyard with Theo or wrestling with him. There's a reality in either or of where I can be, but I don't think that's an example of either or thinking. I think I made a decision about what was important to me in that moment. And I don't think that means that I don't value their future, because I'm not making the world better for that 90 minutes. I'm ignoring them and not devoting time to their future. I don't think that's either or thinking. I think that's as a consideration in the moment, and I don't think that it in any way. I don't think that represents either or thinking or some older way of thinking, and that's something that needs to evolve. I think as a more enlightened person, if I don't see them for another 4 months and I have 24 hours to see them, I would make the same decision. I don't think because I'm stuck in an old way of thinking, but I think it's because I miss them and I really cherish that time I have with them. So I guess I hear the point you're trying to make, but I don't think that I don't accept that. I don't think this is an example of an old way of thinking that needs to change. I think I'm at a different place in my relationship with my kids and my grandchildren, and that's part of my decision making. But I don't think that's an example of what you're citing this as.
Okay, but I can disagree with you.
Sure, you can.
I can understand what you're saying, and the difference is that You see, I personally have the belief, and my belief is that if we don't do something soon to make some changes, my great grandkids are not going to live beyond the age of 25. That there's an incident that most people who are knowledgeable predict will cause a major catastrophe, and we're the ones who can do something to prevent it. But only if we devote some time and energy to it. So I can understand your position that you think you're doing the right thing, and I respect that. But part of it is, I suspect you don't have the same idea that we're the ones that have the ability to make some change, and if we don't do it, what the people who are most knowledgeable are saying is, your grandkids are not going to live beyond the age of 25. Now, if you believe that, if you just disregard it, then I can understand your position. And so you have a different belief. I understand. My belief is I respect what these experts are telling us, that given our history, what we see, that it used to be we were fighting with sticks and stones and bombs and guns. The next war will end everything for everybody. That these are what the experts are saying, and it's only a matter of time unless we can do something to change that. And if you understand that, then it might be worthwhile saying, maybe if I spend a day and a half with my grandkids, and if I'm one of the few people who can make a difference and prevent this terrible thing from happening, it's worthwhile taking an hour and a half or 90 minutes or whatever it is, maybe even more. That it's a matter of balancing your energy a little bit more. But if you do nothing, if you skip this time and we spend 90 minutes every so often to address this issue, it's never going to get done. It's going to take 100 years to come up with a solution. And we don't have that much time. The train is coming down the train track. And I believe that we have less than 10 years. But other people may say, well, maybe 20 years. But even when we talk about global warming and pollution, there we're talking about 30 or 35 years, overpopulation, so on. We're not doing anything to solve these problems, but we're the ones who have the possibility of doing that.
Yeah, I think that it gets to a more basic tenet of this undertaking, which is, do people have to embrace the same belief with the same urgency as you do in order to meaningfully engage with this project? I feel like I'm meaningfully engaged with the project. I don't share the same belief with you about the immediacy of what my personal action needs to be in order to affect this. And I think that it would be a very difficult sell if the idea is to make this more viral or more global. I think a strategy of first getting everyone to believe in the imminence and the priority of this in order to get them to act, I don't think that's a good strategy to get more people to engage in this activity. I think we have to increase people's awareness and try to get them to engage. But I don't think to say that, the reason you should come to this meeting every week is because when you look at your 6-year-old grandchild, they're going to be dead at 25. They're not going to be here. I don't know that that's going to be a useful strategy, whether it's true or not. I think none of us know whether it's true. But I think you have to be able to get people to engage in this activity and this behavior and this thinking, regardless of whether they're willing to buy the same urgency that you feel. Most people don't have the same image of the train on the tracks that you do. So I think just from a global point of view, I think strategically it's an error to assume that everyone has to have the same urgency of belief to be engaged with this undertaking.
Yeah, I think really what we're talking about is marketing. And I think if the primary message is that your grandchildren are going to be dead, I don't think people are going to stay. I think they're going to, instead of worrying about it, I think they're likely to drop out of the group. I think making smaller steps, taking a problem and trying to analyze it using this and trying to figure out how to talk to people who think differently is a much wiser strategy to get to the big goal in the long run. But I would agree that telling people how gloom and doom is just around the corner, unless you do something, I think you'll keep some people, but I think it'll drive a lot of people away.
I
I
also think
completely
there's some
agree
issue.
with Meryl. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Rini.
Oh, I was just saying that I completely agree with Marilyn. When it's a scary message like that, people tend to avoid such conversations because it becomes uncomfortable. So maybe if we have more of action items, wherein we can say that these are the things that you can do, or maybe suggest things that you have done and made an impact, maybe that would bring them closer to the group than saying that uh, you know, the doomsday is near.
I too agree with Marilyn and Rainey because we have so many stresses and so much going on in the world today that's negative. We are frightened to begin with global warming and the Afghanistan issue and the fires and the COVID and on and on and on it goes. That one more scare, one more message of gloom and doom, I think is more than a lot of people can bear. So I would like to see a smaller step towards what we are trying to go for, done more incrementally, because I think that otherwise people will tune out. They'll be afraid, like one more thing I have to worry about, and I'm not sure about this one. So I do agree with the past two people who spoke of the gloom and doom method.
I think that one of the problems is operationally, if your motivation is gloom and doom, there's a huge cacophony of gloom and doomers out there that all feel their gloom and doom is the thing everybody should be focusing on. And the pandemic, the wildfires, global warming, and it's tough to get above the ground and sort of say that, well, mine's really more important, so you should really do what I prescribe versus the other folks. And then you've kind of got the issue with some of the fake news, and is this really, is it really that doom and gloom, or is it somebody has some other motivation? And is nuclear holocaust, is it really worse than the other stuff that's out there? And I guess there is a little bit, there's so much of it that it's easier to throw your hands up and say, well, I'm not sure. I'm not as compelled that when, there's all kinds of people who say, there's all kinds of experts who say it's going to happen. And it's just not that convincing to me, because I think a lot of people, the CDC has taken a huge, that's supposed to be the preeminent body, and, they seem to have been politicized. And I don't particularly believe everything that comes out of them right now. I know that they have some agendas that aren't particularly all about science. So I'm just not sure that I'm compelled by 250 experts are sure the end of the world is coming for the nuclear holocaust. It might be. It's kind of funny, if you don't think about it, it's more likely to come. If you do think about it, that people will be a little bit more aware of it. But I think it's a tough sell, to sort of try to raise above the cacophony with your one doom and gloom, where there's, everybody is sort of competing in that space. That's why I think if you kind of come up with, how do you make yourself happy, and how do you promote safe places to talk with other people, that's something that I think people can kind of get to grips with. It's a positive note. And it might lead to where you want to be, but to me, it makes a more compelling argument than the kind of the fear of, if you don't do this, then your kids are all going to die, so your grandchildren won't be with you.
And I'd like to add that, after meeting with you, Don, for a couple of years, I don't know that I feel any more empowered to do anything about world peace, but I feel a lot more confident in who I am and in talking to other people about those difficult topics. So, I really love what Marilyn says. If we can get, people who have differing viewpoints to have a conversation, that is really progress. I just had to throw in my, not like it, but, I do gather with there's, what do they call? I think they're just called the Peace and Justice group. And I always think, oh, maybe I'm going to see Don in this conversation. Or many times I think, oh, I would love to have Don's voice in this conversation, particularly at Ubiquity University. Every morning they have a Humanity Rising conversation. And as a matter of fact, you could probably present one day on there and get some really good feedback. But those are just some thoughts from me. I wish I could say, oh, I feel way more empowered to deal with world peace after many Genie seminars, but I honestly not sure I can say that.
I think the issue is not, the issue is there really a reason to believe there is a doom and gloom situation? Of course, we don't want to think about it. But when you have lots of people saying, this is real, we don't want to accept it. In our group, we already have people who have differences of opinion here. That's the whole thing that's going on right now. We already have the differences of opinion. We can't come to some, it's very hard for us to come to some consensus that we want to try to find solutions. And instead of saying what's wrong or not working, the issue is, can we look at issues, can we take, suggesting let's find things that we can do a step at a time. Well, the step at a time is if we can just change a few words. That's the first steps. It's easy to teach ourselves to love ourselves more by looking in the mirror and saying nice things about ourselves. That's an easy step. To say both and instead of either or is a very easy step. Or to change our sentence would be a very easy step. It's not all that difficult. But you see, people don't even want to do that. So most of the gurus, the people that are attracting people, what they're attracting is people who are coming to make money. And that's part of the reason why I have the problem. As long as you have this discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots, where the people that, people are starving and people are not having enough, that they're stealing cars because they don't have enough food, and because unless we begin to address each of these situations, but we're not willing to address it because we're stuck in this way of saying what's good for me and my family for here and now. That's a very simple thing to do, but we can't even agree on that. We're not willing to even accept the most simple word changes because we're so stuck in our own idea. We're not prepared to give up very much of ourselves to make the world a better place. We don't want to admit that. So no, I think, I agree with you. People are resistant to doom and gloom. And that's why many people who are knowledgeable are saying it's already too late. We don't forget about it. Take your money out of your retirement program, enjoy it now, because we've already passed the point of no return. We're not at stage 1 or stage 2 now in a problem. We're at stage 4. All we can do now is a little palliative care. We'll try to do what we can to keep people happy before the end. But we're already past stage 3. We're already at stage 4. It's too late to do anything. When you have all these countries that have bombs now that are ready on release date, and it only takes a mistaken judgment or mechanical error or terrorists to figure out how to way to break into the system. There's no second chance here. Unless you do something preventative, it's all over. But if you don't want to look at that, yes, of course, nobody likes to talk about doom and gloom. We like to talk about having picnics and what we can do now. So, have a bite to eat, enjoy it, have a pie, and forget about the idea that the house is burning down. If you have a tiger that's about to eat you, you can say that is an emergency. I mean, it's quite obvious because the pain is right there. The problems we have today are ones where there's no pain. The pain from global warming and from pollution and from nuclear weapons, they cause no pain. It's not until they happen that it's too late. When somebody pushes a button, there's no more opportunity for recovery. So the issue is, can we be descriptive? And it's not a matter of being, we in our group are still fairly prescriptive. We're still caught up in who's right and who's wrong, instead of saying, what is it that we can do that will make a difference? And if we don't address that issue, nobody else is going to do it. If it's not us, who's going to do it? It's not those kids that are in Syria, or just struggling for their life, it's not the people that are told that if you don't bow down and pray 4 times and hope God will treat you a certain way, those people are not getting an education. They're not going to change things. So we are the ones who are going to make a difference if it's going to be a difference. And as I say, for me, I think I'm going to live my lifetime. I think we've got another 10 or 15 years. But as long as you believe, continue to believe that there's not really a real problem, or that somebody else will take care of it. If you don't take care of it now, it's not going to get done. It's not something that can wait until it's convenient for us. If I'm right, if I'm wrong, it's fine. Then you're right. Maybe you're right. Maybe this is all a phony kind of a thing. The people who are knowledgeable about the danger, they don't know what they're talking about. When the doctor says you've got a cancer in your lung, or you've got a melanoma, then the melanoma it looks kind of benign right now, but it's a pretty dangerous thing, this melanoma. If you don't take care of it now and it spreads through your body, it's too late. Well, maybe that doctor is wrong. Maybe that's not the right situation, not the right way to look at it. But if you have knowledge about what to think might happen, and you're willing to get educated, but we don't want to address these issues. So I'm not saying this is to be doom and gloom. I'm simply saying, let's try to look and say what is going on right now. And what is going on now is something we don't want to hear, because you're absolutely right. That is the state of the situation. People are addicted to comfort, and they don't like anything that's uncomfortable. But yet, unfortunately, and maybe fortunately, pain is what drives change. When you're comfortable and you're happy, you don't change anything. But until we recognize there's some pain here, well, the problem we have today, it's not a lion that's ready to attack us. It's not that kind of danger. It's the kind of thing that goes on silently until it's stage 4, and then it's too late. And that's all the message I'm trying to convey to you all. And I think it's very difficult, because I think I have the same situation. I don't like the idea of discomfort, but unless we're willing to acknowledge that, until we face some of these issues, not from the point of view of who's right or wrong or good or bad, but that's the way it is right now. This is not a situation where we're fighting with sticks and stones anymore.
I think just on the receiving end, I feel, and I don't know if other people feel this way, but I feel like I do appreciate what you're saying, and I do agree with a lot of that. But I also think, though, you can alienate the people here and other people you speak with, because they don't endorse it the same way that you do. I think this is the group who appreciates that and recognizes it. But because they don't respond, or we don't respond in the way that meets your expectations, it sounds like you kind of back into an either or explanation. you just don't understand, you're resistant. And I think this group is not resistant. And I think what you're getting is the kind of response that intelligent, rational, motivated people who have competing priorities, that this is how they respond. And this is a very favorable response. People have been coming to these meetings for it's over a year or 2 years now. So I think, this meeting, if I remember, was kind of to teach ourselves, but also to develop a strategy of how to deal and interface with other people. And the response that you're seeing that frustrates you from me or from us, that is a more functional response than what we're trying to get from the rest of the outside world. So I think when you accuse, kind of accuse, I think when you accuse people in this group of still being stuck in either or and not willing to look at the other side, I think that's incorrect, but I also think that's alienating, or I think that goes against what you're trying to accomplish. Because I think this group does get it, and I think even the people who get it, their response is, you see that as either or, it's just not good enough, it's not right. And I think it might be helpful for you to maybe reconsider your stance that these people don't get it, because I think they do get it, but they're not responding the same way that you do. And the challenge here is to work with how motivated, normal, distracted people respond and work with that, not keep rehearsing that you guys just don't get it, otherwise you would behave differently.
I'm very proud of everybody here, by the way. I think you've all done a great job, and you've done quite a bit. I'm really pleased with the progress, actually. We've come a long way since our first meetings, where we spent a lot of time blaming others and so on. We've created the kind of environment that we can talk with one another, and we can say things that people disagree with and still love one another. So I think we've come a long way, but I think we're still stuck in some ways. And to me, I look at this as where you see it as being critical or put down. I see it as different. I see it as tough love. I see it as, when the child says, I want to stay up all night, or, why can't I drive the car when I'm 12 years old? I'm capable. So when you say no, and you say maybe there's a better way, that's not being nasty. I mean, the child doesn't very like the idea, may think that you're mean and nasty. You got a terrible parent. But I see this as tough love. I say that I think until we're willing to look at the world the way it is, not the way we would like it to be. We would like it to be a certain way. For us, it makes clear we're pretty happy, most of us. We have most of the good things we want, but realize that most of the world is in a lot of pain right now that we don't even appreciate. We don't appreciate the things that a lot of people are going through. And as a result of what's going through now, some of the people that are going through this they're going to be unhappy, and they're not, the history is that the haves usually get their heads cut off by the have-nots. That's our history. The rulers, the dictators, and so on, they usually get overwhelmed by the larger number of people who are suffering. And that's what I think is going to be happening here. So I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm simply saying that's the way it is. And that's the way a lot of people who are more objective are saying the way it is. But we're caught up we're kind of addicted to a way of thinking that says my way. That the whole point I'm trying to make is that we're caught up, and we don't realize that we're caught up in this, my way is the right way. And instead of saying, I have something to offer, maybe somebody else has, and let's see how we can come together and figure out what to do. Let's get rid of who's right or who's wrong or who's good or bad. I love everybody here. I don't think anybody is bad, but I do think that some people, may not have an appreciation for the state of the world the way it really is. The state of the world is the way they'd like it to be because it's more comfortable. And
I disagree with that. I think we've been trying to apply some of these principles, and you don't apply it. You apply it in a small way to see if it works. One was being able to talk to people of different opinions. One was to take a problem and try to use these tools to analyze it. And I think they were both positive approaches. And bring it down like this isn't going to bring about world peace. I think I think the only way to do it is to bring it about in small steps. And you seem to not want to see that happen. Maybe I'm wrong, but when we get started, you seem to sort of cut that off. And I think the way to bring about big change is to start with making small changes.
Well, I agree with you, actually. You may not understand that, but I think we're starting right here because we disagree in our group right here. Until we can agree ourselves about what might be helpful, such as learning to listen and so on, until we can get over some of our own biases, that bringing other people in is only going to reinforce the idea who's right and who's wrong again. So I think we've come a long way, but I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we're still not able to ourselves. But if you feel you want to do something else, then as I've said, I'll turn it over to somebody else. And if you want to invite somebody, then let's do it.
I fortunately just got 2 pages that flew into my windshield, so I'm going to happily leave the meeting and answer these 2 pages of problems that I can actually solve. So I'm taking the easy road.
Well, they're sort of urgent, they're emergency kind of things. Probably you have to check that out, and that's the point. When there's something that's really you respect is really important, you deal with it right away. As long as you don't think it's as important, you don't deal with it. So that's exactly the point I'm making. You realize when you get a page as a physician, it could be an emergency, but we don't realize that what other people are saying is emergencies might indeed be an emergency. It's just that it's something that it's emergent because you have to deal with it now to prevent from something happening later. But we understand, and it's not. I think it's appropriate that you leave with my blessings.
Yeah, I hate to share the truth, but neither of them are emergencies. I just rather do them.
Okay, well then that's fine. Okay, and that I understand. That's
okay. Well, good to see everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Now, I was gone I think I was moderately able to engage the last couple of weeks. Did we finish off on the case of the Glastonbury or the guns and the kids who were being caught and released? Because I
don't think so.
Yeah, I think that in my mind, it's helpful to demonstrate that the 7+2 works the way that I think, Dad, you think it does. And so I'd be game to go back there if people are willing, because I still have this sense that you sort of said that, well, since we now have the vocabulary and cast and vocabulary, we've really decided that. And I don't think we have. I'm still stuck on, the both end. I'm kind of stuck on that personal responsibility is kind of important. And I'm not sure how do you compromise that and just say, I don't really buy the idea that, well, these people have had a rough lot, so we're going to give them a pass. And we need to sort of adopt that. I think it's a little bit, people are going to continue as human nature to push as long as there's no resistance. And, the idea that saying we're just going to recognize that, they've had a bad lot and we're not going to arrest them. And then, because nobody is, or the majority of people can't be convinced that we should be sending more resources to these folks, that we'll just let them keep terrorizing everybody until the majority agrees that more resources should be pushed that way. I don't see that as just now that I know vocabulary, that's resolved. I think there's a basic belief in what human nature is, that if you don't create some limits, then people will just keep walking towards them or keep walking over them. And the decision, this isn't so much about the haves and the have-nots. This is just sort of basic human nature. A lot of your arguments about, well, it's the has and have nots. The world's richer than it's ever been. This country is richer than most in the other world. Even the poor people are far richer. So the differences in wealth are, probably astounding or large, I believe, or maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But, the relative wealth of the poor people here is far greater than most other parts of the world. So is it just that, there's the have-nots, or I don't know, is it a conditional have-not that as long as there's somebody who has more than you, that's the problem? Doesn't really matter on an obsolete scale. And there's stuff like that I think needs to be worked on, and it's not as simple of, there's the haves and the have-nots, and the imbalance is just creating instability. I think it has a lot more to do with, if the people who are the have-nots convinced that they're have-nots, then that makes instability. It's not really that relevant on how much they have or don't have. So I'm just not sure quite how vocabulary alone clears that up. I think, vocabulary maybe helps figure out where the pressures are and what some of the basic differences of, worldview of humanity is, but I don't think it makes it, I don't think it resolves it, or it's helpful to kind of recognize that this is beyond just a vocabulary issue.
I think what you're saying, it illustrates my point, Avi. I started the meeting by saying exactly that if we can apply the words for both ends. I gave the practical example. If we realize we have to do exactly what you said, we have to set limits to these kids, but we got to do more than that. We have to do what both sides are saying, that we have to re-educate these kids. We have to see what the basic problem is. That's a much more complicated problem. It's not an easy problem. And it's not a matter who's right or wrong. It's we each have something to offer here. I think you're right. We have to set some limits on these kids. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think that's not enough. It's not enough just to give the guy on the beggar's street a sandwich for the day. Unless you teach him how to get food for the next couple of days, you're going to continue to be dependent on that individual. So it becomes, we can take each of these word switches and apply them to practical behavior. So yes, we set limits on these kids. We figure out what to do. It's not a matter of saying we forgive them because they've had bad upbringings, but we have to do that. And then we have to find out, why are these kids, why do they have to steal? Why aren't our kids going out and stealing? Because they have enough money. They're not hungry. But if you're hungry, then and that's the way you get some money to eat for the day, that's what you do. And that's what your neighbor's doing. So when you talk about wealth, there are a small number of people who have plenty of wealth. We're those people. But there's many more people that are making a couple dollars a day. And there are many people that don't have enough food, and there are many people that don't have enough shelter. And those are the people that are not going to be content. These are the ones that come out and figure out ways to kill the people that are greedy. But of course, we're not being greedy. We're just doing the right thing.
I think it would be useful to continue the discussion next week, and have Avi, would you be willing to lead it?
Yeah, I'll bring it up and table it again.
I like the idea of personal responsibility, and I think that plays into your philosophy, Don. How do we teach personal responsibility or concentrate more on it, whether it be home or the schools? I think it's a big step in going towards eventual world peace, or at least being able to talk to each other. But personal responsibility, I find, is lacking in general in our society. There's some people who have an abundance of it, and then there are a lot of people who don't even care or know what that may mean. It's just sort of the go along with what's happening kind of thinking. But I'd like to see us concentrate somewhat on personal responsibility and what that truly means.
I think that would be really important myself, by the way. That we're not showing that much personal responsibility. We're showing responsibility for our tribe, but not for personal responsibility for the whole system. Sue, you haven't said much. Did you comment before we end our meeting?
Yeah, so recently I was working on one of your website, and one employee was just checking what I am doing. So they asked like, what is this project? So I said it is related to world peace. So then they asked like if in Afghanistan and Kabul, a lot of things are happening, if we are doing anything there. So when somebody like talks about world peace, immediately people relate it to war and terrorists and other things, and they think whether we are doing actively something there. So I said, no, it's not related to that, but there are other things like word switches and all that. So for a young person, what I understood was that if the communication is that we are doing something in world peace, they don't get it at all. They don't understand what is world peace, and then some word switches or some other practices will help. That for them it seems like like a Taliban will not read any book, or like they will not really follow anything, and that is what is effective, like that is what will affect the world. So when I explained them that it is also for your personal happiness, you can go through the material, it will help you to be happy, then they understood, and like at least they had more interest to learn about the content. But when I started with world peace, young people didn't get it at all.
Thank you. Katie, you want to have the last words? We got just a minute or two. You haven't said much.
Just that very good observation from Sue that, in order to target more younger people and get them talking about, and I love the topic of personal responsibility. And also then where is our, it's so arbitrary, the thoughts about what your local or community responsibility is. So I think absolutely having those discussions will be lucrative. And I love it when Abby leads a session, so it's always good.
Thank you, Katie.
Okay, so Abby, you'll be on for next week. You'll be here.
I should be here.
Okay, we understand that you might have emergencies and so on, but generally we'll look for you to be here and you'll lead us off. Okay, lots of love to everybody. I think we're making very good progress. I'm very pleased. But, until there's friction, there's not going to be any change. So I think it's healthy that we can express our different points of view. That's the only way we'll come to some consensus. But if we just sit back, and what happens if people don't speak up and they just stay in their same old point of view, and will not make any change. What's going on in the world today, from my point of view, is not what people want. It's basically what people don't want. We're seeing too many things today that are very dangerous, and we mentioned all those things. But at any rate, it's 11 o'clock, and thank you all for sharing your time, your energy, and you're sacrificing your Sunday morning. But I hope it's all for a good cause. I think it is. I think it's probably, for me, it's one of the most important things we can do right now. But there are other things that are important too. We don't know that. It's not an either or, it is a both and. That's the words, which again. Lots of love to everybody. We'll end this meeting.
Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good week.
Take care.